Okay. Apologize for that. It's good to see everybody here again tonight. If you would be turning in your Bibles to Isaiah chapter 62, we'll begin our lesson there. And I want to start for the idea, as we think about this passage, and we'll make some applications from what the book of Isaiah reads. It's kind of a tricky time that we live in a lot of ways, because when we talk to people about the Bible, and we talk to people about our faith and our religion, we ask them, well, what are you? And they'll say, well, I'm a Christian. And we don't really know what to do with that a lot of times. We've gotten to the point in our society where really, at this point, I almost have to ask, well, what kind? Well, what do you mean by that? Because the reality is that the idea of a Christian can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, depending on who you're talking to, depending on what context you're involved in. And a lot of that is we're a victim of our own, I guess if you want to call it success. You know, Christianity is so widespread in our nation today. I think something like 80% of our nation identifies as a Christian of some sort. And so it's no wonder that you get all kinds of different things. If I look around and see different people who are wearing the name of Christ, there is a wide range of beliefs, activities, lifestyles, all of those things. And it's very difficult for me to look at anybody and say, well, what does a Christian even look like? It doesn't really, frankly, look that different from an American or whatever other country I'm living in. And depending on how you define it, there's a lot of different ways people might look at it. First of all, somebody might say, well, I'm a Christian because I believe in Jesus. And that's a pretty general accepted definition in this society. That's what most people probably, I would say, would believe. Now, again, what is meant by I believe in Jesus is a whole other conversation. But the idea is that's what makes me a Christian. Well, I might also say, well, I'm a Christian because I've been saved. Okay, that's in a lot of ways, those things are basically used interchangeably in a lot of ways. Someone might actually say, I'm a Christian because I've obeyed the gospel. Well, that sounds a little bit more like what we would say. But even that, we think about it, I'm not sure that's really even a sufficient definition. It's true, but it's not really all the story. We might say, I'm a Christian because I belong to this group. Now, that's probably a lot of the ways that people view it in today's society. I'm a Christian because I attend worship service over here, because I'm associated with this group or that group or whatever it might be. Well, that's what makes me a Christian. I might say I'm a Christian because I follow the right doctrine, and I've known a lot of people that this would be a pretty good definition for them. I've checked all the boxes. I know what Christians believe, and I believe all those things, and I practice all those things, and therefore that makes me a Christian. I might say I'm a Christian because I model my worldview after Christ's teaching. Now, this is a little bit more esoteric a little bit, I guess, but the idea that I think Christ is a great teacher, and I've read the Sermon on the Mount, and that's just a great way to live, and I'm going to do that. I'm going to do what Christ has taught. Well, that's good. That's in some ways that's true. I might say I'm a Christian because I go to church regularly. I am identified because every Sunday morning this is where I am, and that's what makes me a Christian. I might say I'm a Christian because that's how I was raised. You've known people, if you've asked people that aren't particularly religious, and you ask them, what are you? And they say, well, my parents were raised in the Baptist church or the Catholic church. So I guess I would say that that's what I am. And that's kind of how people a lot of times will look at it as well. But none of those really, even the ones that we might look at and say, well, there's a lot of truth to that, but none of those are really adequate for an answer to this question. But the thing that is in common in all of these is that we see as a society, being a Christian is something that is defined by how I see myself. I am a Christian because I say I'm a Christian. That's really what it boils down to. I had a conversation a long time ago with, back when I was in journalism, and I had an editor at the time who was very worldly and very atheist and very anti-religion in general. And he was he was going on some tirade about some televangelist that had done this or that, and was talking about how these Christians are just this and that and whatever it might be. And I looked at him and I said, well, and this was in Texas, by the way, and this was in Sulphur Springs, which is about probably 2 miles outside of Dallas for the context of this comment. I said, I can go buy myself a Dallas Cowboys uniform, I can go put it on and run around my yard all day long. I can grab a football and do all these other things. And I can tell you until I'm blue in the face that I am a Dallas Cowboy. That does not make me a Dallas Cowboy. And he looked at me like I had three heads. So he had no idea what I was talking about. But I think you understand what I mean by that. Just because I identify with something, just because that's how I decided to call myself that doesn't mean that's what I am. You know, we live in a society that basically I can be whatever I want to be as long as I say it, and that's becoming more and more true by the day. I can self-identify as a 50-year-old, 6'5" Chinese woman, and that's what you have to accept. And that's just, now, people will usually say, well, you can't really do that, and I'll ask, well, why not? And there's nobody that really seems to have an answer for that. But the idea is I can be whatever I want to be because that's what I say that I am, and being a Christian really has been always and the worst thing you can tell somebody is, you're not a Christian. What do you mean I'm a Christian? Of course I'm a Christian. Why? Because I said I am. And that's not necessarily the argument that we would make, but that's really what it boils down to. Now, with that in mind, there's a passage in Isaiah, and we're going to look back at Isaiah 61 for a little context. But in Isaiah 61 and 62, there's a passage here that I think is useful in that regard. And if we start, just to set what's being discussed here, over in Isaiah chapter 61, verse 1 through 3, this is a part of the book that is a lot of times called the Gospel of Isaiah. This is the part where God, Isaiah has been telling them how horrible they are and how they've rejected God and how God is going to punish them and how terrible things are going to be for them. But now he is going to turn around and say, but that's not the end of the story because God has something better for you. God has a plan for you once these things have been done. God is going to deliver you out of that and bring you back into the land and reestablish you, and I have a plan for you in that regard. And in chapter 61, verse 1 through 3, he says, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because the Lord has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and the opening of the prison to those who are bound, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn, to grant to those who mourn in Zion, to give them a beautiful headdress instead of ashes, the oil of gladness instead of mourning, the garments of praise instead of a faint spirit, that they may be called oaks of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, that he may be glorified. The idea that at one point you were in this condition, but God is going to bring you back and give you a new condition. And that how you were seen before, what people saw of you, the suffering that you were going through, all that you were dealing with, your life is going to be totally different now. As God is going to give you blessings that you didn't have before. Verse 9, it says, all who see them shall acknowledge them, that they are the offspring that the Lord has blessed. And it goes on in chapter 62, verse 1 through 4, which is really kind of the focus of what I want to talk about. But I wanted to make sure that we saw some of the trends that are being said in this chapter. In chapter 62, verse 1 through 4, it says, for Zion's sake I will not keep silent, and for Jerusalem's sake I will not be quiet, until her righteousness goes forth as brightness, and her salvation as a burning touch. The nations shall see your righteousness, and all the kings your glory, and you shall be called by a new name, that the mouth of the Lord will give. And you shall be a crown of beauty in the hand of the Lord, and a royal diadem in the hand of your God. You shall no more be termed forsaken, and your land shall no more be termed desolate. But you shall be called, my delight is in her, and your land married, for the Lord delights in you, and your land shall be married. Now this is the passage we typically will go to. We'll say, well, this is where the idea of being a Christian is prophesied. This is what, and I've had people make this argument, and if this is your argument too, I'm not going to debate that. There may very well be some truth to it. The idea that this is prophesying that at some point during the future, God is going to give the name Christian, and that's what will be called. That's what God's people will be called. I would suggest to you that while there may be some truth to that, I'm not sure that really captures what's going on in this passage. There's something a little bit more significant, I think, going on than just what we are called by someone else. In verse 10 through 12, it says, they shall be called the holy people, the redeemed of the Lord, and you shall be called sought out, a city not forsaken. The idea here is, there's a lot of things that you're going to be called. It's not just a specific name. It's the idea of how you're going to be seen. And I think that's kind of the point of what's going on here. There's a common denominator of all of this, is that what is your relationship to God? How do people perceive you in the way that you live? Now, the language is pretty similar to what we see in Revelation 3:12. where Jesus here is talking to the church, and he's talking about those who will overcome the persecution and the difficulties that are about to arise. And he says, the one who conquers, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God. Never shall he go out of it. And I will write on him the name of my God, the name of the city of my God, the new Jerusalem, which comes down from my God out of heaven, and my own new name. Well, he's talking to Christians there. He's talking about giving them a new name. Well, I think that when you look at all these together, my inference and what I think is pretty obvious here is that what he's talking about here is not about a specific name. It's not about a specific thing that we're going to be called, but what it is about who we are to God and how others see God at work in us. Because he's saying all the nations around about you that have seen you gone off to captivity and they've celebrated, they've thought, look, these people thought they were God's people, and now God has taken them into slavery. Where is their God now? But now I'm going to bring you back, and I'm going to put you in this land where no one is going to be able to deny that you are being blessed by the Lord. And that will impact the way that they view you, and it will impact the way that they see you. And the key here is that it doesn't say, you will call yourself this. It doesn't say, this is the name that you're going to take on yourself. This is the name that God is going to give you. And that's an important distinction, because that's not how we look at the idea of the term Christian. Christian is a name that I label myself. It is something that I determine for myself. But when God talks about the name that he's going to give us, what does the Bible say about this? This is not a name in the Scripture that we take upon ourselves. And it's interesting to note, the word Christian it's only referred to in the Bible 3 times. And twice of those, I would argue that the connotation is negative. Now, I've had people, again, argue with me on that, and that's fine. There's some subjectivity about this. But most scholars that I've read have argued that the name Christian was not a positive term. It was a negative. It was a pejorative. Well, you people are Christians. That's basically what it is. You're a sect of the Jews that follows Jesus. So I'm going to differentiate you from the rest of the Jews by saying you are a Christian. You are someone you're a Christian Jew, or whatever that might be. And it wasn't necessarily a positive thing, but it was based on the activity and the life that they saw in these people and the evidence that they saw in their lives.